Hit record. Okay, we are recording.
Thank you. So I will call to order the City Council meeting, Committee of the Whole for Tuesday, June 16th, 2020 at, I can get a clock at 5:32. For those joining us from our citizens or watching the video later, this is an opportunity for Duval City Council to simply get together and talk about issues. We do have an agenda, and this evening we have our coronavirus COVID-19 emergency update. This evening that'll be provided by Mayor Okerlander. Our emergency preparedness manager isn't with us this evening. Item 2 is development update. I believe that's with Director Laura Thomas. We have a budget calendar review. This is for our next 2-year budget cycle. And these are meetings that will be occurring this year between now and when council is required to approve our next 2-year budget in December. And then finally, we have a budget retreat discussion. On the 30th, we tentatively, and it looks like the majority of council members have responded and are able to attend. So I believe we're planning on that June 30th date. That's a Zoom meeting in the evening. And it gives the purpose of that meeting is for council to be able to talk about council priorities for the next 2-year budget cycle. And so with that, we can get started. Does anyone have anything with the good of the order? And you can just hold up your hand. Councilmember McHenry, and that will be followed by Councilmember Naplin.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to restate something I had sent out. It's just a summary of our last council chat, that it was myself, the mayor, and Councilmember Langle, and we had 2 really engaged citizens on the call with us, and the discussion was just around the situation with protests for racial justice, and I thought there were a lot of good questions and discussion there. So as I mentioned, that I don't have any planned or scheduled for July or August. That could change if we feel the need that we want to open up more time for citizens to talk to us, especially going into a new budget cycle. So yeah, I think then in the next month or so, we could come up with a schedule for September through June.
Good. I got a sense that council's really enjoyed these, chance to interact directly with citizens. Amy, do you need our feedback tonight on whether to look for some dates in July or August? Do you want to do that separately?
If, you know, it's honestly up to everyone. If you, I mean, I'm okay taking a couple months off. I was just thinking as we get into budget items, if we feel that we need a little more interaction with the public. I know it's kind of different now with the Zoom meetings, so maybe we do feel we need a little more availability for the public. If anyone had strong feelings about that, we could. I'm okay holding off for now and just kind of play it by ear and see what happens. Or if you want to be more proactive, we definitely could put some dates together.
Well, let's go with that, where we, you know, I think we can monitor how things are going, and I think we could all use a little break. And I'm pretty sure as a mom and as a wife and COVID-19 and all the rest, that you've got a lot going on in your own life. You've done such an outstanding job setting up these meetings with our community. So we'll please each consider it. We'll give you feedback, and if something pops up, we can certainly work on a date and announce that to our public, to our citizens.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Councilmember Naplin.
I just wanted to remind everyone that the AWC conference that usually costs money is free. And I don't know if anyone else has signed up, but I got reminded of it again today because what showed up in my inbox was registration for a couple things. And I thought, oh, I don't remember registering for this webinar. And then I realized it coincided with the conference. And so that's how they're doing it, some of it. So the ones I got today was a webinar by Steve DiGiulio, Roles of Mayor and Council, which I thought, wow, free training, this is great. And then the other one was just the typical that they have at each of these, which is the AWC Advocacy Academy. So anyway, if anyone hasn't signed up, it's free. And I'm guessing if something comes up and you have to miss 1 or 2 of the events, you know, what are they going to do? So anyway, that's all.
Thank you. Others, good of the order? See, I don't see any hands up.
The mayor,
Councilmember Iyer,
talking.
and then
Oh, sorry.
Councilmember Okerlander.
The mayor's talking. Sorry about that. So yeah, with council's gotten a few emails from AWC about it, but if you look at the schedule, it's not full day commitments like it is when you actually go to the physical conference. And we still have, I can't remember how many voting delegates we have available from the city, but we do have voting delegates for the business meeting as well. And I'm on the list as of this point for being up for a board position as well. So, but just in general, it's a great opportunity to not have to travel and still get a lot of benefit from the organization.
So Mayor, just briefly for any citizens that might be listening later, so we're talking about the Association of Washington Cities. I know you've been involved with them for a while. Could you give us just a little bit of brief update on what they do and what cities are involved?
Absolutely. They represent nearly every city and town in the state of Washington. They're part of, every state has a league of cities or an association of cities that filters up into the National League of Cities, which is another separate organization. But the Association of Washington Cities is the organization that advocates on behalf of all cities in Washington state at the state legislative level and the federal level. I've been involved pretty extensively over the last 11 years on the legislative committee, policies committees, some special finance committees, and I'm currently on the state and federal policy committee, and I sent the draft policy statements out to folks, and also was just reassigned to the state legislative committee, and that's where we get together and try and bring all of the ideas for our cities together to form a unified legislative agenda for the state. It typically stays high level so that it gives the organization flexibility to check in with the board during session and move relatively quickly. But in general, you'll have a very similar agenda for years on end until things get achieved. And a lot of what the cities have to achieve and working for us are the big challenging issues, like getting to budget sustainability and keeping local control and making sure that we keep our state shared revenues and getting transportation funding done and all of those types of things. So they also do a lot of group meetings throughout the year. I don't know if anybody's ever attended one of their little networking sessions. They'll go in different regions and invite all the elected officials, all the city officials from a specific area, talk about what's going on at AWC and provide an opportunity for networking. They also host a twice yearly AWC Mayors Exchange. So the mayors get together from across the state, talk about what's going on in our communities as well as what's going on at the state and federal level. And there's also an annual Mayors Conference. So last year I was invited to speak at that, and that's a really good group of people as well. So they do a lot for us that you wouldn't even necessarily recognize unless you're paying really close attention to their legislative updates. But they're a fantastic organization and really are about as grassroots as you can get for our cities in advocating for cities' needs. They're just fantastic. I've had the good fortune of being involved with them since 2005 overall. From a work level on up, and they've had a lot of consistency in staff. Their staff is absolutely amazing. Many of whom, one of whom is actually the policy director or government relations director, is the former city manager of Carnation. So, it's just, I just really can't say enough about the organization. And as always, I highly encourage involvement with them.
Well, Mayor, thank you. I had a chance to attend for many, many years. Haven't been involved with Bellevue, and everything from learning stuff about negotiations to city policies. There's so many different topics that they go over, and they usually are pretty good about bringing up, what is really hot, that particular year for cities. There's a lot of things, just basic education about liabilities and legal issues. So anyway, I do encourage everybody to take a look. Mayor, thank you for doing that for us.
I do want to point out too, that's also where our health insurance comes from. So we're part of that. They've got little branches that come off of AWC of organizations that impact us as well. So, it's beyond it is beyond advocacy. It's also helping make sure that all city employees have access to healthcare through their cities. So there's a lot more to it than policy as well. I always gloss over that because the policy is what you're involved in the day-to-day.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mayor. Well, I had a couple things I wanted to bring up on my own, if you'll indulge me for just a moment. A lot going on in our society right now, and I think it's really important that all of us, especially as council members, I know the mayor had been taking very seriously a lot of the concerns that citizens have, whether it's about some of the policing we've seen around the United States, or just making sure that our policies, our ordinances, the way we conduct our hiring, other business practices are truly reflective of our society, that they're inclusive, that people's rights are respected. And, you know, I think our founding fathers really laid this out, that we're all created equal and that should be created equal under the law, but in our policies as well. So that fairness has really come to the forefront. And with that, I think it's important for us as council members to just make sure that as we're going through our ordinances, that we're developing new policies, even with our budget, that we make sure that we take into account all those in our community, and that they all feel welcomed and safe. I also want to recognize now our police department. While so many practices and departments are under attack, and while I don't think any of us would say we as people or our departments are perfect in everything we do, I wanted to take a moment to recognize our Duval Police Department. I personally have been very proud of the work that they do. They have worked for years to kind of revamp who they are. They've done that through their policies. For those that don't know, they do use Lexipol. That is not something that Duval created. That is really something that's used nationally, although most on the West Coast. And those are developed by attorneys and professionals in law enforcement and other disciplines that really help guide what they do. Training is a huge part of what police go through. And many of our officers started younger. And so we had fresh folks that were getting new training, and they've gone through de-escalation training and so many other things. But really what stands out, and something I'm so proud about, is our community policing. They really get out in the community, whether it's National Night Out, where they go to block parties throughout the city to say hi, to, you know, provide cake and ice cream and get to know folks, to the resource officers at our schools, where they're really there to help build that relationship and make sure folks are safe. We've seen too many school shootings and things throughout the country that have just frightened parents. And to be able to have officers both to interact in a positive way with our school age youngsters, as well as be able to keep them safe, is a huge part of our community. And almost more than that, it's just who a lot of our officers are. Now, granted, I look at myself and I'm an older white guy. And so I'm not in a position to say I understand what everybody else in our own hometown are going through. Many people of color, regardless of their religious background or sexual orientation, whatever it might be, but all of us need to be treated fairly. And I appreciate that that this is a time for me personally to be able to listen and learn, try to understand. But while so much has, you know, police officers have been under attack, and I'm not trying to say we're perfect, but I'm trying to say that in my own experience, as well as looking at the technical part of what our police do, from the hiring process to their training to their equipment, that as much as any department I've worked with in, I'd say, the last 45 years as my career in the fire service, and I've worked with Seattle and most of those on the east side, as well as the State Patrol and the FBI, that the City of Duval police officers set an outstanding example for really caring for our community. And so I wanted to say that. I can't speak for every council member, but I think it was important as council to recognize the good work that our employees do. I think that we probably all have a long way to go in our own hearts and how we look at other people and biases we have, but especially as legislators, we have an opportunity to truly make sure that all of our citizens are represented fairly and that there's justice in how we carry out our work. So thank you for that. That was item 1. So item 2, we did get a note from our attorney. Eileen had sent out some options. We're currently taking a look at a couple of things. One is our contracting policy, and then setting up a process to look at a procurement policy. I think that's as I recall, a 40-some page document, talks about our purchasing and so on, and includes contracting as well in one part. So the 4 options that she provided, and this came out this afternoon, so I'll just say up front, most of us may not have seen it. That isn't on our schedule to really discuss and review until July. I think July 7th is the tentative date. Those 4 options, by the way, were creating a new working group that would include council members to be able to work on this and then bring it forward. Council could create their own ad hoc committee, which would simply be a group, can be both members of our city staff as well as council members that could work in developing it and providing recommendations. We could bring it to the COW, so all of us can discuss it at a COW meeting. And then the 4th one was staff admin could help develop it. And I think it's already in draft. Is that correct, Mayor?
Yeah, it's an initial draft form based off of the Lake Stevens policy, which is what the Washington State Auditor recommended we look at and reviewed by our own finance director. But it has not gone through legal yet, so it was really just a true
early draft.
Yeah.
So the 4th option again was staff admin could take a look at it and bring it to the full council. So I had a chance to talk to a few of you, not all, and just kind of looking at it and saying what's the best thing to do. And we don't make those kind of decisions here on the cuff. So if folks want to just carry it forward to July, I'm fine with doing that. But I wanted to propose something to you. I looked at all the pros and cons, and every one of those has some real pros and some drawbacks to it. But one of the things that we have created are standing committees. And while our standing committees are really busy, one of the options is simply to have the finance admin committee, which this truly helps fall into, and they could take a look and then we can move it forward to the COW and council. So that would be something I'd just request tonight that you consider. If everybody thinks, yeah, that's the way to go, we can say that's what we recommend to the city and they can take it from there. I have a lot of confidence and background that our finance administration council members have. And that would be Councilmember Langall, Councilmember Naplin, and Michelle, are you here? And Councilmember Hogue. So sometimes creating new processes create more time. The biggest concern I have is not trying to add more to the city. The city has a ton in their workload. And so part of my request tonight and having you consider this is that we streamline it. And part of that is we already have a process in place so we don't have to recreate it. We have folks from the city and the council on there. They can all take a look and provide their input, and then they can forward it to council so that we can all take a look and try to get it moved forward. I would ask for the committee or for the mayor if there's specific things that you think we need to handle really quickly. One of those that come to mind, sometimes there's contracting issues. Sometimes there's been discussion about stipends. There's things that we could certainly try to correct much sooner. But that aside, I think we already have a process pretty well laid out. So I'll be quiet now. This isn't on the agenda, but I did want to hear from folks, and if we can streamline this and move it forward and not have to have it as a future agenda item, and we can just move forward with a process that we already have in place. So comments from council members. Okay, we've got Councilmember Langall and then Mayor Okerlander.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. The procurement policy was something identified as needing some work by the state auditors, and not long after Dana started, it was part of a work plan that she presented to Finance and Administration Committee. So speaking for myself, I've been looking forward to this project because I've worked with a lot of different types of public money for a long period of time. And it's one of the reasons, honestly, I joined council. We've already started actually this process, and the process, we have looked at the first draft. We've already started providing comment. It is a very, very important policy because, you know, separate from public works contracting, it is really the heart of the financial work that the city does. It just really encompasses a lot of very important pieces, everything from contracting authority limits, advertising for services, types of services, how we do bidding or not. So the thing that's really been interesting looking at the first draft is it's got a lot of detail in it. I think it's 40 some pages. And it also references 30 different code requirements in the state of Washington and 5 different federal codes. I'm familiar with the federal codes for sure. Haven't looked up the RCWs, but it is going to require a lot of work. But for myself, it'll be a labor of love, quite frankly. I love this kind of stuff, and I'm really looking forward to working on it and continuing what FNA has already started.
Thank you. Mayor Overlander.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, you know, it's fine however council wants to do it. I think Finance Committee has already invested in it. The thing that we just need to take care of sooner than later is the federal procurement side of it. And just getting, you know, so if we can get that separate policy done and then work on the larger encompassing, because there's differences in opinion internally and externally on where stipends fit in, et cetera. And those are all big policy issues that we have to work on. But I don't want us to lose out on federal funding or get in trouble with the state auditor over the bigger issue when we have to focus on the smaller one and get that done.
So Mayor, you're relating to the CARES Act, which provides money, and that's coming to the city of Duval, a portion of that. And we actually have to have certain policies in place to meet the requirements of the grant monies. So what's the best way for us? Is that something the city can develop a draft just on that? Or does that go through the committee? What do you recommend?
Yeah, you know, and I think this is one of the areas where our city policy isn't clear. In most cities, these policies are just, it's very common that they're just done administratively. They don't go through a legislative body. That has its positives and negatives. And, this is one of the things we've recognized over the last few years. And this is one of those, though, where it's like, I think that it does need more involvement for the larger policy, but that's going to take a significant amount of time. So if we can get the federal procurement part done and get us on solid ground, then we can, council can take the time needed to make sure that we have a policy that is right-sized for our city.
Can you bring an agenda bill forward that would include language that would allow us to accept the CARES monies for the city of Duval, or is it much more involved in that we actually have to have specific?
I'll let our finance director speak to that. Okay. She's much more familiar on the audit side.
So we need to adopt the federal procurement policy or have a written federal procurement policy that hits a whole bunch of different items. And it's very standard for all the cities. The language is very standard. Eileen, actually, North Bend had a similar situation where they're working on their purchasing policy and they just pulled the procurement part out, got the federal procurement part out, got that settled, and then they're going to pull it back into their regular purchasing policy when that one goes through. So that might just be the thing to do. It's pretty standard language.
Can you provide council members with that language via email and then, and maybe the federal language? And then we could be prepared to vote on that at our next council meeting. Councilmember Lango, you have input?
Yeah, I have a question for Dana. I guess two questions. First question is really about what is the timing of this? Because it seems to me we still have time to go at the federal portion, still go to Finance and Administration at our next meeting and take a look at that and make some, thoughtful decisions about what that piece of legislation would look like. And then I just don't know what the timing is. It seems to me like that until Sean comes back and we kind of know what his strategy is for invoicing, that is really a critical piece of information here, because if he can start invoicing sooner, then that definitely means the policy needs to be in place, right? If he's looking to wait till October, when the last date is for CARES, that's a totally different story. But I think going through F&A is important so that we have continuity in how these policies interrelate. And so.
Yeah, go ahead. So I agree. So this was actually an exit item from the prior year, because we did accept some grant funding last year, and we did not have, it was very small, but we didn't have the procurement policy in place. So we should have it right now. But I agree. I was hoping that I could take the draft and present it to the Financial Committee on at our next meeting. And then at that meeting, we could also talk, just kind of focus on the procurement policy as well. So that was my hope.
Boy, that sounds really good. Councilmember Iyer?
Yeah, I'm hopeful that I'm just looking up some of the federal policy from my employer, and it's definitely a resolution that similarly matches the internal procurement and contracting policies of the for regular city business. So I mean, it seems as though it might be something that's related. 45 pages sounds really long for the regular policy, because a lot of it seems to come down to those dollar amounts and the competition, separating out the procurement and the contracting. And it's definitely an evolving thing. I mean, it's good to have the framework to hang your hat on, but it's an evolving thing as cities grow and change, and the cost of business changes pretty rapidly. So I mean, it sounds like, I would be fine with the Finance Committee working on it. They've been diligent about a lot of other items and productive. And the only thing I would say is it sounds like the myriad of issues that are kind of commingled make it more confusing, and then just talking about contracting public works and procurement of goods is really a lot more straightforward thing to talk about. And I think that seems like something that would be, it just comes down to the dollar amounts, and the guidelines by the auditor are generally pretty steadfast, I think, on certain guidelines, and then the dollar amounts that council's comfortable with allocating or providing the mayor with the authority up to whatever is should be a pretty straightforward conversation. So I'm comfortable with moving forward that, but just saying, there's nothing wrong with less than 45 pages. Somebody might be able to.
Thank you, Matt. Councilmember Naplin.
Like me might be able to get through it.
Councilmember Naplin and Councilmember McHenry.
So I think any way we can simplify it and, not repeat ourselves in every section is something to be desired. And so Finance Committee has seen it one time, and, we gave some initial feedback. But one thing that we talked about during the conversation is that we felt like it was really important to share the work we've done. And so we're going to try to use track changes so you can see, you know, here was the policy that was presented to us that had been reviewed internally by staff and administration. And here's the suggestions that Finance Committee has come up with. And especially the thresholds. I don't know exactly how the rest of the Finance Committee feels, but I'm imagining they would support this, that those threshold levels that say, you know, it takes the mayor's signature, it takes council approval, or what level of competition do you need when you acquire these services or purchase objects, that would come to council. We might have some recommendations, but we really would want the whole council to give us some input on, you know, their comfort level with the different thresholds. So that was the approach that we did talk about during the meeting. And I just wanted to let you know that that's where I stand with what I would feel comfortable with, making sure that everyone was on board on those big decisions of threshold levels.
Right. Thank you. Councilmember McHenry.
Yeah, I'm really comfortable with the Finance Committee taking this on, and I really appreciate Councilmember Naplin's comments just now about bringing certain items back to the whole council, just the temperature check, and make sure we don't get too far without a major change. And I love the track changes idea. It's nice for us to be able, if we're not on the committee, to be able to skim through and check things out if we want to. So
good. Other comments? So this wasn't, Councilmember Iyer.
Yeah, and this is definitely perfect timing for me because, you know, I think I was comfortable with, well, I was comfortable enough to vote for it, so I voted for it. But the roof bid, you know, in retrospect, I walked away from that and thought, oh no, I guess that was like 20, it was 20 plus grand. And, you know, I was thinking, well, normally, you know, I was thinking what I would have to do for a 20 grand project to have to get at least 3, it's not a crazy higher, it's a 3 verbal quotes would be what, and I thought having that, at least some simple policy would be great. So I'm really glad to see this come through. So thank you, Mayor.
Well, it seems like there's consensus, especially if those aren't on the committee, that we send it to the committee. So if everyone feels comfortable, and this is probably 2-part, again, there's no official vote here on the COW, but it's really council providing direction to the city. So there's 2 parts. There's the procurement policy, the 40 plus pages that would go to our Finance Administration Committee. And the second part is the policy that really allows us to take a look at accepting those CARES funds. There's more to it. I think, Dana, I kind of truncated that pretty quickly, but there's a lot of work to it. But maybe just a hand up saying, yes, I support that, and that we can move forward having those items go to the Finance Administration Committee. That also allows our citizens to listen in and be a part. I think that's really key to this as well. So if I could just see folks put up their hands that are headed in that direction, that looks like it's pretty unanimous. Mayor, any feedback before we move on?
I don't think so. I think, you know, we'll just try and get that federal side through, and then, you know, start plugging away at the details. I think one of the things we do need to look at is, you know, some of the, when I would like council to consider when looking at some of the changes and some of the thresholds that the finance directors recommended in the policy, that we now do our budget differently, even though it's not codified yet from previous administration, and we now no longer allocate fund balance in the budget. So that was a free-for-all that really gave people within administration the authority to spend money on things that weren't budgeted because it was budgeted as fund balance. And that makes me uncomfortable to have that. And so you can see in a sense like that you'd want probably lower thresholds for council approval or what have you. But I want to make sure, my biggest concern is making sure that we have, as administration moving forward throughout the years, the appropriate level of authority to keep business moving and get projects done without slowing down too much. You know, the RIF situation is one of those where it's a small project. And as our public works director said many times, some of these small projects, it's really hard to even get a bid at all. But yet we also, I think, need to make sure that we have a threshold at which we trust our staff from their lifetime experience to know if we're in a situation like this again, where you only get one bid, whether it's a good deal or not, based on past history and experience. So I think that, you know, whatever comes out of the policy, I want folks to pay special attention to that. Because, you know, in this situation, you know, if we did go out to bid for that roof again, it's not just another bid, which could come in higher. It's also the amount of staff time and the cost of putting those together and putting those out and reviewing those bids. So, you know, those are things to think about beyond just dollars and cents and are more on the practical operational side of things. And so we'll work on it in the finance committee level, but I just, you know, from an administration perspective, I just kind of wanted to share that those are, you know, we have to figure that out, but there's also got to be, you know, some flexibility because we might be in a situation where you can't get more than one bid on something. And it's a low cost thing. So it's may not even be worth the effort.
Councilmember Iyer.
Yeah, I definitely agree that there are, you know, that's something that's, you know, that's prevalent. City that I'm familiar with that is got, for example, just to throw this out there so people are, you know, aware, like 10 grand to $74,000 minimal competition, 3 verbal quotes. And that's just an example. And then 75 to 349 is small works roster, at least 5 contractors, and then 350 or above is the competitive bidding. And these are somewhat in flux, but I mean, there is a baseline where, I mean, verbal quotes are, they can be difficult to get, but it's not really that hard. I mean, it's the contract, it's the formal bidding process that becomes cumbersome. As hard as it is to get somebody on the phone and to give you a number, that's how hard it is to get a verbal quote. So, I mean, these things can be flexible and to the greatest extent that you feel comfortable. So I'm going to send the examples that I have to the mayor and Councilmember Remington and somebody on the finance committee.
Great, thank you for doing that. Well, our next item is coronavirus COVID-19 emergency update. Mayor, I think that's on you. We have about 15 minutes for that, but I'm a little bit over our time already. So if you can figure out how to.
Yeah, I'll be relatively brief. So before Mr. Tozer left on his well-deserved time off, he sent kind of the draft of what he's looking at as far as finances, and has really been delving into what's likely CARES Act or FEMA reimbursable. And of course, he was sidetracked for most of last week by events going on. We had to make sure we were prepared for and address. But in general, you know, the first glance is looking at like we may be able to move forward with some additional granting potentially. And when he gets back next week, we should be able to solidify some more of that. One of the projects we do have out for quote now is the retrofitting of City Hall, which is the, you know, floor to ceiling dividers as well as a security door. And so kind of trying to capitalize on the need that we already have to make it safer for employees overall. In general, I think folks probably saw that yesterday afternoon, King County Public Health Board voted to apply for phase 2. King County seems to be doing pretty good with their numbers right now, but across the state and other counties, the numbers are exploding. And so there's a real danger that, that we could go backwards or get held back. I'm hoping that we get to phase 2 this week with any luck. And I'm not sure how long it's going to take the county to actually put that application into place, but most of the numbers we are meeting. There was an article today, it wasn't an article, it was on a news channel that someone sent to me with our council member Kathy Lambert talking about the fact that our rural cities should be treated differently because, for example, our zip codes had 20 cases total. We've done very well, relatively speaking, to other areas of the state. And we have businesses on the cusp of survival or not. We also have businesses that are doing better than ever. but we're still in this wait and see, and it's frustrating to say the least, but we'll get there when we get there. But if we do go to phase 2, that really doesn't change city operations internally. We're going to continue to keep folks separated and the work from home, and do the best we can to make sure that our employees stays healthy, because we just can't afford, if we have one person in one building, it could create a really, besides people being sick, which is bad enough, it could create some real instability in being able to keep things operating. So that's pretty much it. But there really has not been a lot of new news on this stuff lately.
Thank you, Mayor. Any questions? Councilmember Langle.
You're on mute.
Okay, Mayor, I'm sure you didn't have a chance. You're really swamped, I know. Something came in this afternoon. It says King County applied for Safe Start Phase 2. The proposal unanimously approved by the Board of Health.
Yep.
So looks like we're ready to rock and roll very soon.
Yeah, but does take governor's approval.
Yes,
So,
I know.
Yeah. So that's, and we're hoping that if they do the approval this week, that they'll do it before Friday, because I've been reading a lot. There's a lot of businesses and restaurants that will not open until phase 3 out of choice. But there's plenty, I think, in our community that they're waiting to get that full phase 2 so they can actually afford to reopen.
Thank you. Our next item is, yes, I'm sorry. Michelle, go ahead. Or I'm sorry, Jennifer, go ahead.
This is really quick. I'm glad the mayor brought up that we could start looking at some other ways to spend the CARES funding just based on the budget. It looks like we will have some left over that we will need to contemplate how we spend it. And what I was hoping for is if we could have administration bring forward, what are different things that CARES funding, what is eligible for CARES funding, and we can kind of prioritize how we might want to spend it instead of just having things come one by one as ideas that we either take it or leave it. I'd like to have an approach where we could understand, here's the menu of things we can spend CARES money and work with the community to prioritize what our need is and what we want to spend that money on. So anyway, I don't know how you feel about it, but that's my request.
Yeah, as long as we're talking about the potential extra versus what we actually need, I'm completely good with that, because part of the thing is those council members that participated in all the chamber meetings is, there's still businesses looking for help, and we might be able to, for example, we might be able to use some of that funding to create a grant program where we literally grant out money to folks for their utility bills and they turn around and pay us back. So there's lots of opportunity to give that hand up to help steady some families or businesses in our community. And I think this is definitely more flexible than when we get FEMA funding, but when we do, when Sean gets back and we've got some more final numbers on our estimated costs, we will need to act relatively quickly. So that might mean either an ad hoc or finance committee meeting to kind of go over the options and bring a suite forward to look at and then quickly get policy drafted. Because the other side of this is that we're likely to have to distribute that funding, and the funding that we're getting from the county, we either have to distribute directly or we have to contract with somebody to do it, and that takes time. And again, it all has to be spent by October 30th. So that's one of those top priority things that when we get to that point, we're gonna have to be fast and furious in getting it through council so that it can be done right and it can be distributed. And that's just the fact of it. I just don't want anybody to be surprised when we get to a point where we have to rush.
Member Naplin.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And really, I want to avoid some of that rush if we can by talking ahead of time about what options we might have ahead of time, so that when a time comes, crunch time, and we have to get the money out the door, we've already been able to have a relaxed conversation about prioritization instead of feeling pressured. We have to get the money out the door tomorrow.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a great suggestion. We certainly have needs internally as a city, but if there's additional funds available, really pinpointing what we can do in our community to help support businesses or individuals, I really like that suggestion. Councilmember Hope.
So Mayor, I don't know if you have any thoughts on, like, I heard a story where in Oregon, they said they were going to go to the next phase. So a bunch of businesses and restaurants bought a bunch of food, started working towards it, and then they didn't do it. They didn't ahead, or they went back, or I don't remember what the whole story was. But I'm thinking, how do you know that you can guarantee it for your businesses if we're going to go forward, if there is going to be a date that's set, that it's not going to be, you know, we have to be respectful to these businesses too, as far as trying to, you know, give them the accurate dates, right?
Correct. And typically, you're absolutely right. And that's been a frustration of at all of our mayor's meetings of not getting this information in advance. Typically, when there's been big announcements, we've literally gotten them right before the press conferences. And so we're not even being given warning as mayors. Part of that is because of the fluid situation. But yeah, I mean, it is very possible. You see, I think they had 700, they're up to 700 cases per 100,000 residents in Yakima County now. So we are likely to see some counties go backwards and be pulled out of their phases. And really, I think it goes down to continuing, you know, our businesses are really dedicated here. And they're doing everything that they can. I think the bigger worry is what other people in other jurisdictions do that impact us here locally. But I wish, I mean, if we could get a week's notice, that would be huge. But they're not. If you have a huge spike in numbers in one day, it's very possible the governor will just pull it. That'll be based on public health guidance, and it's not ideal, but it's what we're stuck with.
Thank you. Others, comments? Well, we'll move on to our next agenda item. We have development updates, and I believe that will be Director Thomas. I think you're still on mute, Laura. You got it.
Sorry about that. I had to put my glasses on too so that I can see as I get older. So tonight's just really a verbal update, but I am going to be bringing forward information in a report form to our next Finance and Administration Committee. But one of the reasons why I'm starting to bring this forward today is because on July 7th, I'll make a formal request to release the permit tech job and the assistant planner for authorization so we can complete recruitment. So this is just some basic information. I did want to kind of thank Finance and Administration Committee just up front because they kind of helped with, hey, here's some of the information that we think we would need to begin the process. And so one of the cities that was sent as an example was the city of Woodinville. So just like any other good administrator or planner, you ask them for their spreadsheets and then you make them your own. So we actually have completed the spreadsheet exercise, but I need to have Dana look at it. I didn't want to just like roll it out and there'd be some wrong number in it. But anyway, so I just want to talk about kind of 19 and 20 and our comparisons and where we're at. So for building permits in 19, we issued 36 single family or multifamily, so residential permits to date, which is to right now. This year we've issued 38, so we're already just above that. For inspections in 19, we had a total of 1,547 inspections. To date, we're at 637. If, you know, partly we're a little bit lower than you would expect because of COVID, because basically for about 6 weeks or so, we were very limited inspections only for spoliation, but now we're averaging between 35 and 70 inspections a week. So that's kind of starting to climb. In 19, we collected about $400,000 in building permit review, and to date we're at about 307. So just over 700,000 for the biennium. The valuation, one of the things that we're looking at too is the valuation, and I had a really quick conversation with our finance director, Ms. Mason, and what we want to do is look at the valuation because that will help us project out property tax revenue in the next biennium. And so for 19, we just in building permit issuance, we had about $17.4 million in assessed value that will be added at occupancy. And to date in 2020, we're at 13 million in permits that we've issued. So you can see we're definitely gonna hit a pretty good number of assessed value. We'll be definitely well over where we were last year. So we're well over 30 million of assessed value increase in the biennium. I do want to caution though, it does take a while for that to catch up for taxing purposes. Usually it can be 6 months to a year and a half behind. It just depends on how often the assessor makes contact with us. And by the way, they typically do make contact with us twice a year and update data twice a year. So they'll come in, like even if we have a building permit that's just been issued, they'll value it higher as if the building permit's been issued. We are continuing to see an uptick in general, what we call general information request meetings, and also in pre-applications. We've had quite a few residential and, believe it or not, non-residential development pre-applications. In fact, we have another one this week for a new project that's commercial, so stay tuned. I'll let you know. It's in our UT zone, so something more closer to our downtown. So that's always exciting to see some development or redevelopment. It's technically a vacant lot, so stay tuned on that. Right now, to date, since December, we have received 180 permits, but when you take off the 38 that we've issued, we have 142 in process for review. We do have other permits that we consider, that aren't like a single family or multifamily permit. So in 19, we had 304 of those types of permits. That can be a TI, an addition, a right-of-way permit. To date, we're at about 107. Again, I would have expected those to be a little bit lower because we couldn't take in certain permits for almost 2 months. So I think we're starting to see that trend move up. Just some other general information that I wanted to make council aware of, and I'll put this in the written report as well. And we haven't had this issue before, but we're starting to see it on a particular project that provided all of their permits within a couple weeks time. Is a building permit application is good for 12 months. So when somebody submits an application, they have 12 months to pick up that and for it to actually become a building permit. There is an opportunity for a 90-day administrative extension. So there is that. I wanted just council to be aware of that, because I think we always think of, well, how long is the building permit good for? Well, it's not a building permit until it's paid and issued. And then once it's issued, you receive 18 months, essentially, time to build that out. There is, again, an administrative ability to extend that for up to a year. It just depends on certain criteria. So I wanted to let you know that. And then just to give you a update on a couple of our larger projects and all of the hearings that we're starting to go through right now for projects that have been in our pipeline. So Willow Ridge is re-engaged the city at the beginning of the year. Their bank is actually picking up the completion of that project. And honestly, we'd like to see it completed. We don't want to see an eyesore out there where it's a partial completed project. So we're working collaboratively with their team. Unfortunately, their building permits expired, so they have to come in with a new building permit, even though they have 4 buildings out there that are somewhere between, like 95% complete down to about 70% complete. So that's always a challenge because building codes change. And specifically for theirs, the energy code changed. And so we're having to work through those issues, and they're going to have to make some modifications to bring those up to that new code. Duval Village, we have their first 3 building permits ready for them to pick up. So I've actually already requested a meeting with them to kind of get on a better timeline of how they're going to pick up their permits, because the last thing we want to do is have them pick up all 99 permits in 1 week. We'd kind of like to hope that they would, kind of, maybe starting in July, or even June, start to pick them up so that maybe like 3 or 4 buildings a month so that we can get that. Because what happens is if somebody picks up all permits at one time, it can wreak havoc on our inspection team because we have to try and push things out so that you don't have hundreds of permits or hundreds of inspections that you need to have kind of consolidated, where we'd have to hire a consultant like WC3 to come in and augment our either plan review or our inspections, because we're trying to keep as much of that in-house as possible. As you've probably noticed, Toll Brothers is going to town. They picked up another 9 permits today. So we'll see the revenue from that, and they'll start construction. So far, they've been doing a really good job out in the field. It's been pretty smooth in inspections. The first couple of buildings, you always have to kind of get used to one another. So we've finished kind of that. And now we're, I would call for the most part, a well-oiled machine. Because we are seeing buildings out there that are large multifamily buildings that the city's never seen build. So it's definitely a new era for us, as well as even for Toll Brothers. I mean, they build some multifamily, but their superintendent, this is a new project for him as well, to have that many multifamily units. As you've probably seen, North Hill is finishing its build out. So we're getting pretty close to build out. We still have a lot of site issues that we need to resolve, but we'll be working through those for the summer. As you've probably seen, you're starting to see about once every 7 to 14 days a notice of decision come through from our hearing examiner, because our planning commission and council. So you'll receive one today if you haven't already. 65 Degrees came in this week, the hearing decision, and so did Thayer. And on that note, 65 Degrees submitted their first set of engineering drawings. We allow early review after SEPA has been issued. So we just had our team meeting to complete engineering drawing review for the first set. So they're anxious, ready, and willing to start development pretty quickly. We signed also for Toll Brothers, we signed for their next phase, that phase 3 and 4. Construction approval. So their next step will be to start setting up their pre-construction meeting. So that'll start pretty soon. So we're going to see quite a bit of activity. Obviously, Rio Vista is going to town as well. They're starting to, they'll be starting to put walls in. They needed a couple of eyes on their walls. Again, they had some modifications, so we're getting those reviewed. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just making sure I hit all of my notes. It looks like I have. I know I've given you a lot in like the last 10 minutes. I feel like I'm just like, blah. So if you have any questions or suggestions in information that you'd like to see, now's the opportunity, because I'm finishing up some of my number gathering.
Councilmember Naplin.
I was going to ask you afterwards, but I might as well ask. One thing I recall is that 2019 was somewhat of a lull. And so I don't want to ask a whole bunch of, for a whole bunch of historical information, but only having 1 year to compare and trying to decide, put it in perspective of where we're at. Just having 1 year. I know North Hill was kind of winding down. Most of the other projects, hadn't hit final plat, and so we weren't really, so there was kind of a weird year there in between. So if possible, if it's not a ton of work, I don't know how much work it is to pull, some of these kind of the major categories, such as, total permits issued, number of inspections, some of those bigger primary drivers. If we could get a little more historical than just one other year.
I can do the best I can, but we're so busy, honestly, Councilmember Naplin, that I just have to be really cautious, like how much time I spend. But what I can tell you is having 180 permits in this year is historic. And so it is really busy. What I would say is on average, we probably average in the low 60 range. but what I know that I can get a couple more years worth of data in there, but I can't go back 10 years, but I could go back at least a couple more years, at least for building permits and inspections.
That
You
would
know-
be amazing. Yes.
Like,
Thank you
no,
so much.
I seem to remember that we actually may have discussed this at council a few years ago, and I think we got the historical data. So I'm going to search through my email too.
I already have it. It's just transferring it into my new spreadsheets.
Oh, okay.
I'm just trying to be cautious.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking if I could find the email that was, if it was an email of the previous report, it would provide some context without necessarily getting into the new report process.
I'll actually be able to send that out because we did it at our big community workshop a couple years ago. So if anybody was at that, you'll remember that we actually gave almost 20 years worth of data. So what I'll do is I'll go find that spreadsheet and then incorporate it.
That would
Yeah,
be great.
I would be fine just getting the last one because I think we could probably just look at that. And so I don't know if you need to reformat it on
Yeah.
my.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Same here. And just going forward, we can continue with the new format.
Good suggestion. Other input? Councilmember Lingle.
First of all, I don't know if Laura will remember this, but she and I had this pipeline discussion in May of 2017. It was the first time I experienced anybody in the city, and we've had this discussion a number of times. And so, you know, knowing how much this is important to our tax base, it's a good reminder how development in the city, even at greater densities, and yes, we know it's controversial and it's delicate and so forth, but it really, it does have a longer horizon benefit than some other types of things we do. But the other main thing I wanted to say is that this relates specifically to the request coming in is, you know, the difficulty in development is that you have this pipeline and you have an expense that's up front with your new employee or ongoing employees, but you also have a back end sort of residual liability. So when we see getting in a bunch more money from, you know, property taxes, permits, and so forth, we have to remember that for a couple years out, we're going to have other responsibilities on carrying that position because, you know, large developments don't all get developed at once. They flow based on market demand. So I think this sounds really good. I'm super excited about a report. You know how much I love development data, and it'll be really interesting to see how this ends up flowing.
Thank you. Other council members? Well, Laura, I have a question for you. So we had a new position that was in the budget, and we put that on hold with COVID-19. But just a quick check-in. How are we doing? I know that we're required to review permits in a set period of time, and I'm looking at that number and I'm thinking there is no way. So we either farm it out to somebody else. It often costs more. They don't know all of our own codes quite to the same level. What's the recommendation? Is that something that we can have you bring forward? We can take a look at? Because my understanding, the funds are there, which is paid for through the developers.
So I will be making that formal request on the next meeting. This was just kind of like to try and give some information and see what else I needed to bring forward. Because what we didn't really talk about on this side is I tonight only really talked about the building department. I didn't talk about, you know, the planning side, which is we still have a lot of entitlements and we're averaging, you know, we're supposed to take between 90 and 120 days, depending on what type of permit. And we're like in the 200 and 300 day reviews right now. And we have some policy work that we have to get done by the end of the year. In fact, one of them has to be done by the end of August. Then we have our comp plans and some other stuff. And we just have not gotten any traction on policy work and development. And that is, you just want to be consistently looking at policies. We have quite a few backed up because I've got a list of policies that council members have talked to me about, like whether it's, you know, conditional use permit, some updates to other parts of our zoning code. We know that we want to look at parks and trails at some point. And I feel like we just can never get outside of the focus of current development. And that's just where we're staffed at right now.
I think another one of those we're looking at is parking downtown. Do we need to modify? Because a lot of builders, they don't have the property necessary, so they'd have to build underground parking. And the cost of doing that is pretty prohibitive for doing that kind of building in Duval. So
yeah,
I think
you're
there's
right.
other things we really need
Another
to
policy.
take a look at and move forward.
Yeah, we had a pre-application with a redevelopment for essentially a block, a partial block of town that went from, Main Street back to First Avenue. And, it didn't work out because they would have had to have put parking on Main Street and parking also there. So we definitely need to look. But at the same time, you have to really be cautious when you do update your parking plan, because you have to then think, okay, where are we going to park? I mean, not having enough parking is actually a really good problem as well. I mean, talk to Snohomish or talk to Monroe or any other community. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you have enough as you're looking at bringing in either new buildings, redevelopment, or even new buildings that are just a new TI where somebody's come in and it's going from, say, not technically retail, but maybe an office to a restaurant. So all of a sudden you've created something that only took 2 or 3 spots, now taking, 10 or 15, kind of every hour. And that's going to be a challenge because, we don't have a lot of parking. I mean, we have a couple of areas, but you have to walk, right? Kind of like when you go to Alderwood Mall. Sometimes you have to walk a quarter mile. And so we're going to have to start looking at that. And I think then really analyzing our downtowns and kind of putting a grid to it. Okay, how many stalls do we have, right? And start really looking at it. The challenge is a lot of cities do exempt parking for redevelopment of buildings. And that's both a pro and a con. It allows you to redevelop a site to maybe something that's a higher and best use that the community may like. But then once it's built, then, you kind of get the community on the other side going, oh my gosh, I can't find parking, right? It's a double-edged sword.
Well, thank you. The number one question I get has anything to do with our development is, when does the donut shop show up? I get that asked.
Oh, so
more
I
times
didn't,
than I can
sorry.
tell you.
I will make sure that I give a full report on the status of our projects. But
Yeah.
the good news is we're in the final review. So my guess is that permit will be issued here in about the next 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So we're really excited.
Well, being a retired firefighter, I can't help but say, I think the police were asking that question most, but I'll just put that aside. So thank you for that report. Very well done. We appreciate it. So we have 2 more items. One is our budget calendar, and the other is our budget retreat discussion. I had sent out a couple of special dates, June 30th and July 14th. June 30th was going to be a council special retreat Zoom meeting in the evening. And the purpose for that would be for us to discuss budget priorities. The other meeting was July 14th. That meeting, I believe, was going to be a meeting with directors. Is that right? Yes. Director Thomas is nodding, and that would give us an update on, kind of starting in on the budget and where we're at on current budget, as well as taking a look forward and getting more information on directors. Yes, Director
So
Thomas.
July 14th, that's our quarterly department updates, pretty much like us summarizing where we're at from January through June. So it's not really related to
for
budget.
next-
Yeah,
yeah.
okay. Just making
Well,
sure.
I'll go with that. That actually is more for budget this year, but very key to us to kind of know where folks are at. One of the big questions with COVID-19, both in our community as well as with council members, is how are we doing on our revenues? We created a budget, but that was without thinking COVID-19. And that will give Director Mason an opportunity to have actual numbers in front of us so we can take a look and see if we have reduced revenues, if they're even, if we need to make adjustments, but that'll be really good. And that's quarterly now. Is that right, Laura? So we'll be hearing each quarter from all of our directors. And Mayor, I really appreciate that. That's a huge step for us just in communications and getting to hear directly from each director. So if you haven't looked at those two dates, June 30th and July 14th, those are Tuesdays in between council meetings. I've heard from most, but not all, but please do check your calendars, get back. I think the majority have said they're available on the 30th. So I think that we'll go ahead and start. We don't have much time, obviously, but start planning on that. And I'll send out information as quickly as possible. The other thing we have is the budget calendar that was part of our packet. I do want to check to see, are there any updates on that? I think I received this a week or so ago. Are there, Laura, do you know if there's updates on that budget calendar?
Ms. Mason, it looks like can answer.
No.
No, we haven't made any updates. It's the same.
Okay,
So,
thank you for that. And I do think we have the June 30th meeting on there as well.
It is.
Council had specifically asked for that draft budget calendar, so I appreciate the city bringing that forward. It's very helpful for us in planning. I would just ask council members to take a look. It's so critical that if you're not able to attend a meeting, that you just simply let us know ahead of time. Certainly we can't all make every meeting, but the more we know, make sure we have a quorum, make sure that, especially on budget, it's important that every council member, even if they can't attend, get the necessary information they need. And I know our finance committee has been working hard on trying to get us information and help lay out a schedule that we could all work with. So please see that. Is there I know that we just all received it in our packet. Could I get that sent out to all council members as well on an email, if possible?
Oh, absolutely. I'll do that right now.
Okay, I think that just gives us another handle on it as well. Moving on to the budget retreat discussion. Jody, did you have input?
Actually, you were just getting ready to talk about the retreat. Your email mentioned virtual only meetings, and I just want to put the caveat out there that the OPMA restrictions that the state has been having in place for no in-person meetings technically expire tomorrow at midnight, could be extended again. It's been extended so far, but I just want to throw it out there that if they do not extend the OPMA requirements for no in-person meetings, staff is willing to open the DVC at this point to allow for the public to attend, of course, with social distancing and masks and whatnot. So I wanted to throw it out there that they may not be technically virtual only, although all of you guys will be virtual.
Great. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. One of the key things on any budget process is to try to hear from the community. There's different ways to do that. One is to put out a survey of what's important to them. One is to give them opportunity to come to meetings and have opportunity to contact us and say, hey, this is what's important to me. Another important step, early step, is to hear from council. There's a lot of pieces to this. One is just to simply say, what are your priorities? And I set out examples from probably half a dozen East Side cities, those that are close to us. Larger cities have very large category like public safety and mobility, which goes everything from sidewalks to transportation and so on. So they have large categories. And then budget items fit into those priorities. And many departments try to say, hey, my budget request fits into 2 or 3 of your items, Smaller cities like Carnation, if you saw, theirs are very specific. We're trying to upgrade Main Street. We're going to, fix something up on 3rd Avenue, so they get more specific, I think. I think we're what I would call in between. I think it's very healthy to have broader priorities that people in our community can relate to and that cover most of our services. Because I think a vast majority, if not every single service we provide, definitely important, but how critical and how do you prioritize where we spend money? And the reason that becomes critical for us in the budget process is at some point when you're trying to get stuff done and fund things, you run out of money. There's something that's below the line and things that are above. And so the prioritization, both from council as well as from city directors and the mayor, really are a process that allows us to say, where do we put our money? What do we have to do? What are our top priorities? And with that, I'll also mention one of the most important things that budget does, and folks don't always consider it this way, but I do, and I think many, is that the budget document is actually what I would consider your biggest policy document in a city. It shows you what your priorities are, not just where you're spending money, but how much money. It shows everything from human services to basic services that we provide, public safety and so on. And so it's really important that we have opportunity as council to simply review it and come prepared, I hope, to be able to talk about what our priorities are. Take a look at those lists. There's different ways to approach it. Not every city does it. Duval is unique. We get to do it our way. But I would ask you to take a look at those. I certainly shortened some of them, like City of Bellevue. It is much larger than 5-6 bullet points. And you can go on any website for a city and just look up budget priorities, and they'll show you, probably not for this year, but probably for the last year or two. And you can take a look at much more information. I'll try to send out some additional information as well. My goal would be, as we come together and work with our city management, to really be able to talk about what our priorities are, to be able to write those down. They don't have to be too extended. You may have something that you want to say, hey, I want to, upgrade a park or add something. Maybe it's a larger thing, like having a parks department. Certainly they can be the broader categories where we're saying, these are the services that are most important to us as a city. And the broad categories allows us to fit the things that we actually do. But it's also a chance for us to say, are there things that we're currently doing that just aren't a priority anymore? Or are there things that we're not doing that we need to elevate and say, hey, this is something new? I think years ago, we wouldn't have talked about some of the technology things that we have. And certainly maintaining our edge on technology in this day and age, especially in our community where there's many folks involved with tech or working from home or businesses that we keep up on. So there's a lot to that. I'll be quiet now. Laura, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. Mayor?
The only thing I would just have to say is, just like the last biennial budget, I'm going to have folks be internally focusing on the things that need to get done, and asking for the full picture of what they actually think they can get done in 2 years, not what they can be funded. Because historically, what I've learned through the last budget process is, historically, departments would submit their budget and then not necessarily the full administration weighing in on what's important and not. And I think that's part of why we're in such a significant deferred maintenance situation with our buildings. And so part of my goal, and part of it will boil down to the staff capacity to do this much work as well, is that in their original requests, what I would like to do is have their original requests of what they need for the 2 years, what they think they can achieve in 2 years. And then, we'll obviously, administration will make decision packages, but I want that information to be included in the budget so that we have the long-term view of some of those things that that might not be the top priority in the biennium, but have to get done within the next 4 to 5 years. So that's just one simple way for me visually to see and keep track of things. But I think it'll also provide more insight into the needs of the city overall, and kind of bring some more sunshine to what it takes to operate and maintain a city. So just from my perspective, that's definitely where I'm coming from. I'm hoping that we can, continue on with increasing of human services funding. Part of that will obviously depend on what our revenues are looking like and the need. I think one of the things that when we do that, we do need to be considerate of is that the 2019 census information gave us a super, super low poverty rate of 2%. So we don't have the need of the outside King County, and when we do allocate those resources, it has to go to people within our community. So making sure that we provide enough, but are following, making sure that the agencies we provide to are following the guidelines. So there's more deep diving that needs to go into that. I've been working on browsing some other cities' budget surveys, community budget surveys, and trying to pull something together. And one of the other things I'll be doing, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, because of the CARES Act funding, is trying to get a little pull out to the community on what their human services funding and their business funding needs are, so that we can have some feedback as we look at what potential uses we might be able to use that CARES Act funding for, so that we're doing the best we can to have the biggest impact.
Thank you, Mayor. Other council members, input on either our special meetings, budget calendar, or our retreat coming up on the 30th. Councilmember Langle.
Just a quick comment. One of the things I noticed in procurement, I'm not going to get into any big detail, was that some of the things from Lake Stevens, I immediately thought of as going, whoa, that could have a staffing impact. And so this is one of the, I just want to say, this is a really good example of how, you know, the ongoing communication right now with administration around money and policy can really get us a little bit more aligned, so we aren't asking staff to, we're not passing policy that's going to actually cost us more money than what we could possibly generate for additional staff or something like that. So I'm really looking forward to this budget process. It sounds like you're doing things very different, and that's exciting.
Yeah. Well, when we have the right people at the table, it makes it easier to do, doesn't it?
It does.
I'm excited about this too. It's a huge part of our responsibilities for both the mayor, for us as council members, a lot of work for our city staff. We've been through the 2-year budget once, so we're still getting our legs under us. Bulk of our work as council folks doesn't start till the 1st of September. So if you look at that calendar, you'll see the city's doing a lot behind the scenes. In fact, have already been doing a lot. Well, with that, we do want to take some time to take a break before our city council meeting. Unless I see any other hands up, we'll go ahead and call this meeting to a close.
Thank you.
With that, we're adjourned. Thank you, council, mayor, staff.